The sliding doors of azure dunes glide apart with a sigh so soft it could be mistaken for the resort's own heartbeat, and in that instant a wall of Outer Banks heat collides with air, conditioned cool like two stories trying to occupy the same breath. Evelyn and Charles Barnes stride into the marble atrium, every step rehearsed for the Instagram vacation they imagine ahead, their rolling bags clicking a sharp metronome across the floor. Sunlight knifes through angled glass and splinters into golden shards that dance over travertine tile. But the lobby's climate is precise and clinical, as if the very temperature refuses to let chaos in. A string quartet recording unfurls from hidden speakers. Debussy, gentle enough to make money feel weightless. And for 8, maybe 9 seconds, the Barneses are perfectly convinced they belong here. Then Charles slows, his linen sleeve brushing against Evelyn's as his gaze snags on something he cannot immediately process, a burnished brass plaque affixed to a white column, polished so fiercely the letters seem to float in midair. Pierre Pateof Maya Barnes. The name pulses in his vision with the unnerving finality of a courtroom verdict. The plaque catches a blade of sunlight and hurls it back into his eyes like a mirror. He blinks, expecting the name to rearrange itself into someone more reasonable. Yet the alphabet remains stubborn, the kind of stubborn forged only in hurricanes and heartbreak. His hesitation ripples outward. Evelyn's designer tote, perched on her forearm, begins its slow ballot toward the floor, mascara, passport. A meticulously folded family reunion itinerary spill across the perfect tile with a clatter loud enough to silence the lobby. The receptionist freezes mid-smile. A bellhop stops, suspended between duty and voyeurism. Even the air conditioning hiccups, the mechanical lungs of the building startled into stillness. Behind a pane of frosted glass, Maya Barnes watches the tableau like a director previewing the first frame of a film she wrote long ago in the dark. She feels rather than hears the collective inhale, and for a heartbeat, she is back inside the narrow Key West studio where floodwater once lapped at her mattress, promising to swallow her diploma and her certainty in the same gulp. This lobby is a polished mirror of that memory's opposite, where one space reeked of mildew and neon desperation. This one tastes of sea salt and quiet power, but the emotional gravity is identical, survival masquerading as spectacle. Hello, curious souls, welcome to Family Revenge Files. If you're new here, brace yourself. If you've been around, you already know I never waste a disaster. So picture this: the very people who once declared your passion an expensive hobby, who revoked your tuition, who wrote you out of the family newsletter and labeled you ungrateful, have just stepped into the empire built entirely on that discarded passion. No forewarning, no soft landing, just a brass plaque and the echo of their own disbelief. Tell me, would you savor the silence, or would you orchestrate a symphony of consequences? Maya glides from behind the glass, each footfall precise, as if the marble had emailed her its coordinates in advance. She wears a foam-wrapped dress that shifts like light on shallow water, and a silver coral pendant resting against her sternum. But it is the dive computer on her wrist that arrests attention, ticking soft blue numerals like a metronome for deeper currents. She could have chosen a power suit, could have armored herself in boardroom silk, yet she prefers an outfit that whispers where she came from: miles of reef at dawn, salt drying on skin, data sets crunching through sleepless nights. Evelyn straightens, lips parting, but she cannot articulate an apology that belongs to the present. Every sentence yawns into the past where it must reckon with abandoned promises. Charles's jaw flexes, a tell Maya remembers from childhood when negotiations began to buckle under truth. 6 years earlier, this same man had closed the joint account meant for her tuition, shrugging that marine biology was nice for volunteer work, but unfit for legacy. 6 years earlier, Hurricane Ian tore the roof from her rented studio, baptizing independence in salt water and static. She remembers scooping water with a salad bowl until she laughed from the absurdity of it. Tides inside a living room, dreams floating like drunken sailors. She remembers waiting tables that smelled of fryer grease and resignation, guiding budget snorkel tours in blistering fins, scraping reef health data from her own dives onto a second-hand laptop whose fan sounded perpetually out of breath. She remembers coaxing that data into a fledgling neural net, naming it ReefMind, and submitting a grant proposal that felt like tossing a bottled message into open sea. praying an angel investor would find it before the surf erased her handwriting. The angels did arrive, wearing business, casual, and offering $1.8 million. And suddenly the girl who once counted coins for instant noodles found herself negotiating solar panel pricing and sustainable linen contracts. She returned to the very resort where she had mopped floors for minimum wage, outbid a hospitality giant by leveraging ReefMind's intellectual property as collateral, and renamed the property Azure Dunes, a sanctuary where every suite bore recycled driftwood art and each bedside note invited guests to adopt a square meter of reef. Yet in all her spreadsheets and site plans, she never factored for the kinetic thrill of this precise moment, the emotional ROI of watching two skeptics meet the full-bodied consequence of their own imagination deficit. She stops 3 paces from them, enough distance for courtesy, not enough for denial. Her voice emerges calm, but each vowel is honed like a surgeon's scalpel. "I understand you've already settled your group invoice," she begins, and Evelyn flinches at the recognition of her own oversight. Maya extends a clipboard. There is a single-page addendum beneath the clip. By occupying any suite on these premises, guests of the Barnes reunion agree to participate in a 3-hour reef restoration workshop led by ReefMind, including 1 shallow water dive. Medical exemptions may substitute a shoreline cleanup. Noncompliance will result in immediate checkout without refund. Her tone never rises, never cracks. This is not vengeance in its loud, operatic form, it is a firm hand closing a ledger. The ballpoint pen trembles between Charles's fingers. He tries to summon the gravitas that once intimidated boardrooms, but shame curls around his throat like seawater filling a leaky hull. Evelyn's eyes glisten, but the tears remain pinned behind etiquette. Even sadness, it seems, must obey house rules. Viewers, I promised you a true-to-life tale where saltwater justice meets generational amnesia, and we are barely at the lobby. If you want the full dive, from a $47 thrift store camera to the night I wired $3.6 million and told Destiny to start charging rent, hit the subscribe button right now. Your support keeps these stories rising from the depths, and it tells the algorithm that resilience and accountability still matter on this chaotic platform. Before we plunge deeper, answer me this and drop your choice in the comments. A. When the people who doubted you walk into your triumph, do you quietly let them feel the magnitude of their mistake? Or B. Do you invite them to repair the bridge they burned, knowing the reconstruction will now follow your blueprint? Comment A or B below, and let's see which current carries more of us forward. The lobby's silence feels like a taut sail. Every second of stillness is wind building behind the canvas. So I let the moment linger just long enough for everyone to memorize the tremor in my father's pen. Then I pivot, motioning the concierge to resume check-in, and turn down a corridor washed in soft turquoise light. Behind me, luggage wheels begin to roll again, but the hushed voices that follow are threaded with confusion rather than confidence. A glass door marked staff only admits me to the operations wing, and as it swings shut I slip into a story my parents think they already know: the prodigal daughter who chose coral over case law and paid for it with banishment. What they never counted on was how efficiently isolation can grind a single dream into adamantine resolve. 6 years earlier my world fit inside a second-hand Subaru stuffed with snorkel masks, 1 chipped ceramic mug, and a thrift store camera I had bought for $47. I had driven that car south until the map blurred into open sea and landed in Key West because nothing about the island felt finished. Its edges kept dissolving into water, inviting reinvention. My apartment was a converted storage shed with a tin roof that pinged like a steel drum whenever it rained. 2 weeks after I signed the lease, Hurricane Ian roared ashore, stuffing the streets with seaweed and snapping palm trunks like matchsticks. I spent the storm's eyeballing water into a cracked salad bowl and whispering bargains to whatever force of nature might listen. Take the furniture, leave the laptop. The roof peeled, drywall wept, and at dawn the ceiling fan hung limp as a drowned gull, but the laptop survived. And that was enough. Daylight became a ration. I slept in 3-hour shards between double shifts at a dockside diner that smelled of fryer grease and thawing shrimp. I learned the weight of coins, how many quarters tipped into a gallon of gas, how many nickels bent a grocery budget toward rice and eggs. But after every shift I biked to the marina, wheeled out rental tanks, and slipped beneath the waterline where currency meant nothing, where parrotfish grazed on algae and coral polyps glowed like galaxies condensed into thumbprints. I brought a clipboard and a cheap GoPro, mapping bleaching events in grids so tight they looked like embroidery. At night I fed those images to a wheezing laptop, coaxing Python scripts to recognize patterns of mortality the human eye misread as clouds of sand. The program crashed more often than it ran, and each failure felt personal, as if the ocean itself were testing my patience. Still, line by agonizing line, the code improved. I called the neural net ReefMind, because the reefs were losing theirs. Whole ecosystems forgetting how to remember their own color. The grant application to Marine Tech Labs was written at 3 a.m, caffeinated by instant coffee and terror. I submitted it and forgot, because forgetting is safer than hoping. 6 weeks later, an email pinged my phone while I balanced 3 plates of conch fritters on one arm. I almost dropped them when I read the first line, "Congratulations." The grant was $1,800,000, disbursed in tranches contingent on quarterly progress. Overnight I became a custodian of other people's money, and, more disorienting, a custodian of their belief. Good fortune, I discovered, is its own category 5, chaotic, demanding, no time to mourn the familiar. I hired 3 engineers, negotiated server space, and leased a 14-seat co-work loft that still smelled of surf wax from the surf school that had gone bankrupt there the year before. We trained ReefMind on satellite imagery, drone footage, diver surveys from 4 continents. We fed it the algebra of death and asked it to predict life, and somehow it answered. Money breeds momentum. A venture group in Miami offered another seed round, a sustainability fund dangled a partnership, press releases sprouted like mangroves. I traveled to conferences where I was introduced as a pioneer, which made me smile because pioneers usually carry scars and I was still nursing blisters. Then came an RFP from the Coastal Heritage Trust. They wanted to convert a neglected beachfront hotel into a proof of concept green resort powered by solar, desalinating gray water, educating guests about reef preservation. I walked the property, recognizing the lobby tiles I had once polished with a broom whose handle gave me splinters. The trust expected my bid to lose. Hospitality conglomerates had lawyers polished to a shine. But they hadn't considered intangible leverage, ReefMind's intellectual property, valued high enough on paper to backstop a loan, and a willingness on my part to sign away every personal asset if things went sideways. They accepted my offer at dawn on a Thursday. By afternoon the papers were notarized and I drove back to the hotel, my hotel, windows rolled down, salt whipping through the car, laughing so hard I almost missed the turn. Renaming it Azure Dunes was the easy part. Harder was gutting rooms down to studs, convincing contractors that reclaimed driftwood could look like luxury, demanding suppliers replace single-use plastics with algae-based alternatives. The resort reopened 9 months later to soft press buzz eco-friendly, data-driven, female-owned. Occupancy hit 87% in the first quarter and climbed. Some nights, walking the hallways, I still felt like a trespasser dressed in someone else's success. Then I'd glance at a wall where vintage dive photos hung, shots I took with that thrift store camera, and remember the shed roof buckling in a storm, and the imposter dissolved. A week ago, an aunt I adore but seldom hear from forwarded me an email thread titled Barnes Family Reunion 2025. 40 relatives, 3 nights, ocean view block, prepaid at the best group rate they could negotiate. My name did not appear anywhere except on the resort's title deed. I read the roster once, then read it again, not angry, not even surprised, just struck by how quickly absence can become tradition. It took 3 clicks to convert their reservation into a charitable donation earmarked for a Saturday reef restore dive. And so we arrived at today's lobby tableau, a living diorama of disbelief. I leave the operations wing, follow a staircase trimmed with sea glass mosaics, and step onto a mezzanine overlooking the atrium. Below, my father endorses the workshop clause with a signature tight as a clenched fist. My mother exhales as if releasing a debt she forgot she owed. I watch them tuck the clipboard away and move toward the elevators, their posture a study in forced composure. The lobby music modulates into a brighter key, almost celebratory, and I know the soundtrack will follow them all the way to their rooms, a quiet reminder that the walls here keep excellent secrets but better memories. If you're still listening, I promise the full dive, and we have only skimmed the surface. Make sure you've tapped subscribe so you don't miss how a hurricane, a battered laptop, and one reckless wire transfer spin into the showdown at dinner, where a wetsuit becomes formal attire and accountability finally learns how to swim. And remember the question from the lobby: when the doubters arrive at your doorstep, do you let silence do the talking? Or do you hand them the blueprint for a bridge they once burned? Drop A or B in the comments, and let the current of conversation pull us into deeper water together. Dinner is scheduled for 7, yet by 5:30 the resort is already humming with a current of uneasy anticipation. The Barnes relatives, freshly showered and dressed in coastal, chic pastels, flow through the lobby like a school of fish that senses a predator nearby, but cannot identify which shadow hides the teeth. They wander the sculpture garden, snap polite photographs beside a driftwood arch, and study the schedule posted on reclaimed paper placards: ReefMind restoration dive, Saturday, 0900 am, mandatory attendance. Some pretend excitement, others calculate excuses. No one asks who wrote the rule. The brass plaque has answered that question far too clearly. Maya spends the late afternoon in the gear room, where the smell of neoprene and salt steadies her nerves better than any meditation app. She strips wires from a dive light that flickered during yesterday's test, solders a fresh connection, and lets the small, controlled flame remind her why precision always outlives bravado. When the resort clock chimes 6:15, she changes into the outfit planned for this evening's quiet coupe: a graphite, gray wetsuit, zipper half, closed beneath a tailored linen blazer the color of bleached coral. The juxtaposition is intentional, half boardroom, half ocean, because reconciliation, if it happens, must learn to breathe in both worlds. She clips pearl earrings to each lobe, a subtle nod to the mollusks that build beauty one iridescent layer at a time, then threads her coral-shaped pendant outside the lapel, where it catches the hall light like a tiny lantern. The private dining room chosen by the reunion committee overlooks dunes silvered by moonrise. Two parallel tables form a long, fragile corridor of linen and glassware. Name cards await in perfect calligraphy. Hers is conspicuously absent. She takes the end seat anyway, the symbolic head, then rises the moment the first wave of relatives drifts in. Chairs scrape, conversation stutters. Cousin Logan, the family's unofficial peacekeeper, and the only relative who ever DM'd her after the schism, mouths a silent wow when he sees the wetsuit under the blazer. She winks, a quick semaphore between allies, and turns to greet the room. "Good evening, everyone," she begins, voice amplified not by microphone but by the hush that falls whenever awkwardness meets authority. Dinner tonight is chef's choice. Line, caught mahi, coconut rice, hydroponic greens grown right here on the roof. But before we eat, there's one more clause I need your signatures on. Gasps pop like corks. She gestures, and two servers wheel in a narrow credenza stacked with ivory envelopes. Inside you'll find a simple waiver acknowledging that the reef you'll help restore Saturday is the same living system that fortifies these dunes against erosion. In other words, by protecting the coral, you're protecting your own beachfront investment. Her smile invites challenge. None arrives. Pens scratch. Even the skeptical uncle who once called climate change political theater bends over the paper, brow furrowed, as if the act of signing were an unexpected quiz he intends to pass. When the last waiver is collected, Maya lifts a handheld projector and beams a looping, silent video onto the far wall. It shows bleached coral filmed 5 years earlier. Ghost white bones under milky water, then dissolves into time-lapse footage of the same reef today, blooming neon blues and radiant oranges. No narration, no statistics, just the irrefutable before and after of a planet trying to heal if humans will let it. Forks pause mid-air. Evelyn presses a fingertip to her lower lip as though testing whether sound is still possible. Charles studies the screen hard enough to carve worry lines where none existed this morning. Logan, eyes glossy, reaches for his phone. He goes live on TikTok without warning. The ring light case paints his face in soft fluorescence, and suddenly the dining room is a stage whose audience sprawls far beyond these walls. "Hey, world," he whispers, camera panning to Maya. "That's my cousin. The one the family thought was chasing a useless dream. Turns out her dream bought the roof over our heads tonight. Think about that before you doubt the next scientist or artist you meet." Within minutes, the viewer count spikes past 50,000, comments scrolling like ticker tape. Did they apologize? Where can we donate to ReefMind? Tell her we're proud. Maya doesn't stop him. Public accountability, she has learned, accelerates private reckoning. Instead, she addresses her parents directly for the first time since the lobby. Mom, Dad, tomorrow at dawn the reef spawns. It's like witnessing galaxies surrender to gravity, a billion eggs clouding the water, life gambling everything on a current yet to be decided. If you want a front row seat, meet me at the dock at 5. Her mother's breath catches, a tiny sound but enough. Charles nods once, the motion sharp and unfinished, as if agreement were a muscle he hasn't stretched in years. Dinner proceeds, though no one tastes much. Conversation flows in cautious rivulets until dessert, sea salt caramel custard topped with candied algae. When plates are cleared, Maya stands one last time. For those wondering what happens next, she says, gaze sweeping the room. I wrote a blueprint. It starts with humility, continues with data, and ends, if we're lucky, in coral that remembers how to glow. She thanks the chef, thanks the staff who once called her coworker, and thanks her family for attending what she calls, or an experiment in restored habitats, human and marine alike. Later, in the privacy of her suite, she reads Logan's live stream comments until the screen blurs. Somewhere down the hall, she hears her parents arguing in muffled, wary tones. Then, incongruously, both laughing, as if the absurdity of the day has finally punctured their armor. She closes her laptop, unzips the wetsuit, and steps onto the balcony where wind carries the distant hiss of waves and a scent like cold iron and childhood. Below, the dunes gleam under moonlight, resilient as ever, waiting for dawn. Maya wakes 3 hours before sunrise, dressing in full dive gear this time. No blazer, no concession to land. In the mirror, the wetsuit hugs her like living armor, sculpting every scar and muscle memory into sleek certainty. She shoulders a mesh gear bag heavy with extra masks, reef safe sunscreen, and 2 laminated printouts of ReefMind's heat map predictions, the reds and oranges glowing like molten glass under the bathroom light. Downstairs, the lobby is hushed except for the low hum of the filtration waterfall. But as soon as she steps onto the veranda, she spots 2 silhouettes by the dock lanterns. Evelyn and Charles, bundled in resort windbreakers, coffee cups steaming in their hands. A small part of her had doubted they would come. The larger part understands that shame can masquerade as punctuality. She greets them with a quiet, morning, then issues brief instructions. Stay behind her, watch your footing. Breathe slowly when the regulator goes in. And though their nods are stiff, she notices the relief in their eyes when she speaks to them not as prodigal child nor benefactor, but as professional guide. The dive boat is a 30-foot catamaran rigged for research, its deck stacked with milk crates of nursery fragments and biodegradable zip ties. Cousin Logan arrives a minute later, phone already recording. A few more relatives appear, drawn either by curiosity or fear of missing a family headline, and by 5:15 the catamaran is pushing through ink, black water while a sliver of moon fades behind tattered clouds. Maya runs through signals, checks each BCD, and explains that reef spawning happens in a single synchronized exhalation of eggs and sperm, an underwater blizzard set to a lunar clock older than language. When she finishes, there is nothing left to outline except the possibility that the reef might refuse to perform. Nature, she reminds them, is a free agent. They descend just as the eastern sky rinses itself with pale violet. The water is surprisingly warm, visibility a shimmering 30 feet, and Maya feels the old, steadying hush inside her helmet where her breath rolls and folds like tide in a seashell. She motions Charles forward, guiding his gloved hand to the skeletal fingers of a staghorn colony she planted 3 years ago. Algae once filmed these branches in dull brown. Today they pulse faint lime under his dive light. He hovers, weightless, and she sees realization dawn behind the tempered glass of his mask. This is not abstract science but a living cathedral rebuilt one fragment at a time. Evelyn's regulator bubbles beside her. Tears cannot travel in salt water, yet Maya senses them in the tremor of a hand that reaches, skims the coral, and retreats as if stroking fragile porcelain. At 0547, right on ReefMind's projection, The first coral polyps release their spawn. It begins modestly, tiny orbs drifting upward like dust motes, then accelerates until the water column becomes a milky galaxy, pink and amber particles spiraling toward the surface in slow carnival. The Barneses float in suspended disbelief, bodies outlined by bioluminescent plankton that ignite when touched. Logan's camera captures everything: Charles's hand closing gently around a fistful of spawn, opening again to let it rise, Evelyn folding her arms across her chest, as though to steady a heart that wants to bolt from its rib cage. Back on deck, the sun shoulders above the horizon, staining the catamaran in rose gold. No one speaks for several minutes, each person busy translating the experience into a language they can keep. Finally, Charles clears his throat. His first attempt at words fails. The second lands soft but sure. "I am sorry," he says, syllables halting yet unmistakable. He looks at Maya, then at the crates of nursery coral. "I thought legacies came from land deeds and titles. Turns out they can come from teaching limestone how to breathe again." Evelyn steps forward, removes her windbreaker hood, and meets Maya's gaze full on. "We didn't just doubt you," she says, voice shaking. "We doubted the world could still be wondrous. You proved us wrong." She glances at her husband, then back. "How do we help properly this time?" Maya inhales, tasting engine exhaust and sea, salt and the raw sweetness of forgiveness beginning to germinate. "First," she says, "you let the people you hurt decide the shape of your apology and the pace of your redemption. Second, you show up, consistently, quietly, without the expectation of praise. And third, you fund scholarships for young scientists who look like impossible dreams to their own families." She pulls a waterproof binder from a dry box. Grant proposals, field, kit budgets, school letters of intent. "I wrote the blueprint, it just needs signatures." Charles doesn't hesitate. He takes the pen, signs, then places it in Evelyn's hand. She signs, and Logan, still streaming, pans his phone across the papers, narrating for an audience that has swelled beyond 200,000. They're putting money where their doubt used to be. This is what course correction looks like. Back at Azure Dunes, Maya assembles the family in a small amphitheater off the lobby, a room designed for guest lectures but repurposed today for an intergenerational debrief. She projects a simple slide: healthy boundaries are respect, not revenge. Over the next 20 minutes, she outlines 3 pillars, her voice steady, no trace of reproach, only clarity earned the hard way. Pillar 1: price your worth. She recounts the moment she mortgaged every possession to secure the resort, explaining that risk calibrated to core values becomes investment, not gamble. Pillar 2: state your borders. She plays the security, cam clip of the lobby plaque reveal, laughter rippling through the room at Charles's stunned expression, then reminds them boundaries articulated early, avoid explosions later. Pillar 3: transform pain into community. She cues the before and after reef footage again, pairs it with new data showing coastline resilience, and ends on a satellite shot where restored coral appears as a thin glowing thread hugging land like protective lace. "The ocean doesn't forget injury," she says, "but it always attempts repair. We can do the same." As the talk closes, she turns, finally, toward the unseen viewers she has been addressing in shards all along. If you have ever felt erased, let this story tattoo itself on your doubt. Silence is not your only refuge. You can build something so luminous it forces the world to recalibrate. Subscribe to the channel if you want more maps for redemption and resilience. Each click tells the algorithm these stories deserve daylight. Share the video if you know someone standing at the edge of a dismissed dream. Call it a life raft disguised as a link. She pauses, letting the weight of invitation settle, then offers a last reflection. "My family and I will spend the afternoon transplanting nursery fragments. Maybe the coral will take, maybe it won't. Tomorrow or a century from now, someone will measure the outcome." That's the humility of restoration work. You sow possibility and surrender the timeline. A half smile tugs at her mouth. But if you listen closely, you can already hear the reef remembering its own song. Cut to an exterior shot: Maya and Logan, suited up once more, wade into the shallows carrying crates of coral nubbins. The camera lingers just long enough for a curious green sea turtle to breach the surface behind them, head tilting as though asking permission to cameo. The frame holds, gentle wavelets murmuring around ankles, then fades to black. A full minute of blackness hangs on screen, just long enough for viewers to wonder whether the story has truly ended. Then a single white line types itself across the void. In ecosystems and families, restoration is never a one-time act. The letters hold for a heartbeat before dissolving into an epilogue montage, silent footage of the barn's relatives, hair still wet from the dive, kneeling in the nursery shallows beside Maya as they tie coral fragments to limestone puck mounts. Logan's phone balanced on a rock, Liv's stream chat, hearts pulsing like secondhand bioluminescence. Evelyn, ankle deep in tidewater, helping a 6-year-old guest sprinkle native dune grass seeds along an eroded berm. Charles poring over grant paperwork in the resort lounge, his initials landing beside Maya's with a final, decisive stroke. The montage ends on ReefMind's dashboard, the heat map for that stretch of coastline shifting from alarming amber to tempered yellow. A forecast rather than a guarantee, but proof that trajectory can be edited. Cut to Maya standing alone on the moon-lit deck that wraps around azure dunes. The ocean behind her is black silk stitched with whitecaps. The resort lights throw soft halos across teak railings. She speaks directly to camera. No soundtrack, no overlay. Just voice and wind and the hush of distant breakers. You followed me through a hurricane, a hostile lobby, and a dawn dive that rewrote an old contract, she says. But here's what matters most. Transformation is an invitation, not a verdict. My parents signed a blueprint, true, yet signatures are promises that need daily muscle. Tomorrow they have the choice to keep lifting rocks, keep planting hope, or step back into comfort and watch from a balcony. The reef will remember either way. So will I. She leans forward, forearms on the railing, posture relaxed yet charged with possibility. Next week we head to Belize, where ReefMind spotted an unexplained, cold, water upwelling that could change how we fight bleaching events worldwide. If you want to witness data turn into fieldwork in real time, and see whether my family keeps showing up, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. That tells the algorithm to surface our stories instead of burying them under distractions. A small smile tugs at one corner of her mouth. And because every journey is richer when we map it together, here's your closing thought experiment. If you had to choose one legacy to leave behind, one a monument with your name etched in stone, or two a living system that no one can trace back to you yet benefits generations, which would you pick? Comment 1 or 2 and explain why. I read every answer, and the best reasoning will feature in our next episode's shout out. She straightens, hooks a thumb toward the dark horizon where a faint lightning stitch flickers. Storms are always forming somewhere. The question is whether we build walls to hide from them or breakwaters that turn fury into fertile ground. I know which project I'm betting on. Good night, resilient hearts, and I'll see you in the current. She steps back. The camera tilts skyward, capturing a meteor streaking silent fire across the tapestry of stars. An accidental flourish no production team could schedule. Then iris is down to black. A soft chime signals YouTube's end screen on the left. A thumbnail of the Belize upwelling preview. On the right, the Revenge and Healing playlist glows with the quiet promise of more stories that refuse to stay submerged.